Hello and welcome back to the third video of Let's Figure Out AWS VPC. Now in this third part we would be talking about security groups and network ACLs. So before we move further, just a quick recap of what we have discussed so far. We said that in AWS we can create our own boundary of isolation called as VPC. VPC has a name, it is created in a region, and you provide a CIDR notation to give a list of private IP addresses which would be used to assign to your virtual machines. We then said that further a VPC is further divided into smaller areas that is called as subnets, and basically we would be doing this to apply different rules to different subnets. Maybe one subnet we will provide internet access for our web servers, and maybe other subnet would be for your databases, which would be completely isolated. Subnets also have three properties. It has a name, subnets are always created in an availability zone, and again we give a CIDR block to the subnet to provide a list of private IPs from which values would be picked up and assigned to our virtual machines. So far so good. This is what we covered in part 1 and part 2. Now in today's video we will now talk about how exactly would a traffic flow from a web server in one subnet to a database server which is in another subnet, right? So basically what you would be doing is each of our subnets will have private IPs. So from your web server you would provide the private IP of your database server to establish an SQL connectivity in your connection strings. What would happen next once you do it? Would your traffic just pass through? The answer is no. Once your traffic leaves your web server, there is one more component just outside your web server, which is called as a security group. Every traffic leaving out of your virtual machines or any traffic that enters your virtual machine first goes through this security component called as security group. Now basically security groups are so those who know about firewalls, security groups are nothing but virtual firewalls, just that they are external to your virtual machine. Those who don't know about firewalls, just ignore it. So think of security group as something like, imagine you are working in sales and marketing department. You want to send a marketing material to your friend who is working in a research and development department. Now in this case, your company has employed one personal bodyguard with each and every employee. So before your parcel actually reaches your friend in a different department, your parcel will first be handed over to your bodyguard. Your bodyguard will actually check the parcel as per the rules, as per the instructions given to your bodyguard, and only if the parcel is in compliance with those rules, then only that parcel will allow to pass through, right? Straightforward. Same way is your security group. Any traffic moving in and out of your virtual machine goes through the security group. You need to specify a set of rules through which you will say which traffic should be allowed to pass through or which traffic should be allowed to move in. So security group basically have collection of rules. Two types of rules: inbound rules and outbound rules. Inbound rules apply to traffic that is coming towards your virtual machine. Outbound rules applies to traffic which is flowing out of your virtual machine. So now in this case, you want to establish a SQL connection to your database. Your request will first reach your security group. Now here in your security group, you need to have a rule. You need to configure a rule in your security group which will say allow SQL traffic to pass through. So basically you will say allow TCP traffic you'll create an outbound rule saying that allow TCP traffic that is sent on port 1433. I think that's what is the port that Microsoft SQL Server works on. There are other things that you can provide. We'll cover that in the demo. Right? So basically, there should be a rule that should allow your traffic to flow through. Fine. Now next, once there is an appropriate rule to cross the security group, once it has crossed the security group, your traffic will reach the boundary of your subnet. Now, to flow out of the subnet, similar to what a security group is to a virtual machine, there is one more component to your subnet which is called as network ACL. Alright, ACL stands for access control list. Now, your traffic, once it moves out of security group, once it is trying to move out of the subnet, will first reach a network ACL that is associated to your subnet. Now, network ACL is also similar to security group. It has a collection of rules, both inbound rules as well as outbound rules. The outbound rules will decide what traffic will be allowed to flow out of your subnet. The inbound rules will decide what traffic will be allowed to flow into your subnet. Right? So if you want to send your SQL traffic, you now need to, your request will reach network ACL. You now need to create a rule in network ACL, an outbound rule that will allow SQL traffic to flow through the network ACL. So again, this should not be difficult to understand. Imagine, remember the analogy that I was saying? You want to send a parcel. First, you have a bodyguard, your own personal bodyguard that checks your parcel. Once that bodyguard allows the parcel to pass through, that parcel will reach to your department gate. Now at your department, at your sales and marketing department also, there is a security team. And that security team will also check your parcel to see whether its contents are allowed by your corporation or not. And only if it allows the parcel to pass through, then your parcel will move on and actually reach your other department. So your network ACL is something similar to that security team that takes care of security of your department. Alright, so once you create the outbound rule that allows the traffic to pass through, what happens next? Next, there is something called as a router. Every time that you create a VPC, automatically, implicitly, a router is assigned to control the traffic within the VPC. So, your traffic moving out of your network ACL will reach the router or router, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Now it is this router that will then see that this traffic is destined for IP address of virtual machine VMDB, which is in SNDB. So this router will now forward the traffic or route the traffic to your SNDB subnet. Now again, before your traffic can reach your SNDB subnet, what does it have? Your SNDB subnet also has its own network ACL associated with it from the router. So now the traffic will reach the network ACL of your database subnet. Here you need to specify a rule that will allow, and this will be an inbound rule that will allow incoming SQL traffic. Only when you have configured this rule properly, the network ACL will allow the traffic to pass through. Something similar to now your traffic is being allowed by now your parcel is being allowed by your personal bodyguard. Your parcel was allowed to go through by your security team of your sales and marketing department. Next, this router is something similar to an internal facilities guy, right? An internal courier service. So this guy will then pick up the parcel that is allowed, will see where it is destined to. Okay, this parcel is now destined to a different department, research and development department. So your facilities guy, your internal, let's say an internal office boy, will pick up your parcel and will reach the gates of your sales and marketing, research and development department. Again, over here at the gate, the parcel will be checked by the security team of your research and development department. Only if there is an appropriate rule to allow the parcel to pass through, then what will happen? Your parcel will go through network ACL. But again, before reaching your database, there is a security group associated to your VMDB, and now your traffic will reach the security group, the personal bodyguard of your friend. Now the personal bodyguard of your friend will again check the parcel that you have sent, only if it is allowed. Again, in this security group, there should be a inbound rule this time that should allow the SQL request to pass through. Only if there is an appropriate rule, then only your request will pass through and will reach your virtual machine. Okay, pretty straightforward. Now let's see, once your request has reached your database, maybe you have inserted a record, or maybe you have asked for some 200 select star from user table, this, that, whatever. Now what happens to the responses? Again, the same funda. Your VM will give a response that will first reach your security group. Okay, over here. Now over here, the security group needs to have an outbound rule that will allow the response to pass through. However, notice that I have created this outbound rule in dotted line, which means you don't have to explicitly create it. Okay, the security group is called is stateful, which means the security group will realize that, hey, this traffic that is trying to flow out, this is actually a response to an inbound traffic that is already been allowed. And since the inbound traffic is already allowed, obviously it's a response, I will allow it, right? That's the stateful nature of the security group. So you don't have to configure this outbound rule. Automatically the security group will allow the traffic to flow through. However, from the security group, now the traffic will reach the network ACL of your SNDB. Now network ACL is not stateful. Network ACL is stateless. Again, there has to be an outbound rule that should allow the traffic to the response to flow out. And this outbound rule, you will have to explicitly configure it. In case of security group, you don't need to. Security group will allow the responses. In case of network ACLs, you will have to configure the rules to allow the responses as well. Now, from your network ACL, the request will be picked up by the router, the response will be picked up by the router or router. The router will then forward that traffic to network ACL of your SN web. Again, over here, there has to be this time an inbound rule in network ACL that will allow the SQL response to pass through. However, again repeating, network ACL is stateless. You will have to explicitly configure a rule, an inbound rule, to allow the response to pass through. Once your responses passes the network ACL, it will reach the security group of that sits before your VM web. Now over here, the security group being stateful, you don't need to explicitly configure a rule. That's why I'm using dotted lines. The security group being stateful will realize that, hey, this is a response to a request that is already configured. So I will allow it to pass through, and hence the response will pass through and will reach your virtual machine. So this is how your whole traffic flows internally from one virtual machine to another, maybe in the same subnet or maybe in the different subnet, but in the same VPC, right? Your personal bodyguard, your department level security team, and then your internal facilities guys that takes the parcel from one department to another. Now, a lot of time there is confusion as to why is there two layers of security, why a security group and then why a network ACL. So a couple of things over here. We'll just talk about use cases for now, and then later we'll talk about more details. Basically, security group can only allow traffic. You can only say, hey, allow a SQL request, or allow a SQL response, allow an HTTP request, or allow an HTTP response. Network ACL can also do that, allow the traffic, inbound and outbound traffic, but along with that, network ACLs can also be used for blacklisting. You can deny a traffic as well. All right. So typically what we do is we use security group for whitelisting, for allowing traffic, and we use network ACL for blacklisting. So let's take a use case. Now you have a web server, and obviously web server should allow an HTTP request from outside world. Fine. So you will allow all HTTP requests in your security group, whitelisting. Likewise, you will allow HTTP request in your network ACL also. But remember what you'd also do. We said in network ACL, you can also set deny rules. So now you want to allow the request from rest of the world, from everyone, but you know certain IP addresses are those of hackers, and they just bombard your web servers and they pull it down. So you know a range of public IPs which bring your server down, and you want to blacklist them. You don't want to have request from those IP addresses reaching your web server. So those blacklisting of IP addresses you can do in your network ACL. In your network ACL, you can configure a rule saying that hey, disallow an HTTP traffic, an HTTP request if it is coming from 52.53.54.55, if you are aware of such things. So basically we do blacklisting using network ACL, and we do whitelisting using security groups. I hope things are clear. So let's actually see this in a demo. So I'm logged into management console. The first thing we'll do is we'll go to the EC2 console. Now recall yesterday we created two virtual machines, VMweb and VMDB. Now if I click on VMweb, we can see over here the security group associated is SGWeb, and if I click on VMDB, we can see over here the security group associated it is SGDB. So let's go ahead and now add rules to our corresponding security groups. So I select VMweb. Over here I have SGWeb, security group associated to our web server. I do right click, open in new tab. Now here for SGWeb, we have inbound rules and outbound rules. Now before the demo, what I have done, I have deleted all the rules or pre-created rules, whatever, so that this security group is the rules are absolutely empty, and we'll go ahead and create rules from the scratch. All right. So security group SGWeb is associated to your web server, and what are we going to do? We now want to make a SQL call from our web server to our database server. So there has to be an outbound rule that should allow SQL request, outgoing SQL request from the web server. So the way we do it is we click over here in outbound rules and we click edit. Now in this list box, as I said, assume that the database server is Microsoft SQL Server. So we need to scroll down over here and select. So in this list box, MS SQL. Now the moment I select MS SQL, basically what it will do is it will allow TCP traffic that is sent to port 1433. Now in a rule, you can also specify the destination. So you can give one particular IP address saying that allow outbound rule only to one particular IP address, or you can give a range of IP addresses. So let's say we can say here 10.0.2.0/24. This is the IP address range of our subnet database, right? So this will allow only the request that is sent to that subnet database. Or alternatively, in the destination, you can also give the destination as that of a security group. We know that our databases would be associated to a security group called as SGDB. So over here in destination, we can also say SGDB. That means allow outgoing traffic only if it is directed to a virtual machine that is associated to SGDB. Having done that, we say description is fine and we click save. All right, so with this in SG Web, in the security group of our web server, we are now allowing the outgoing SQL traffic, SQL request. Now likewise, once that request is processed, you will get a response back also from the web server, right? That response will again come to your security group. However, you don't need to explicitly configure any rules over here to allow that response to pass through. Why? Because as we said in past repeatedly, security group is stateful. Since you have already configured the outbound rule, security group will allow its corresponding responses. All right, so this is what we have configured for SG Web. Now let's go ahead and configure for SGDB. So over here we have VMDB, which is associated to SGDB. Right click, open in new tab. This time we need to configure the inbound rules for SGDB, saying allow a SQL request. Again, click on the inbound tab, click on edit button. Over here again in inbound rules, you select MS SQL. You are saying in SGDB, security group associated to your database server, allow incoming traffic to port 1433. Now this time it is the source. Incoming traffic from what source? Here you can either give the CIDR range of your SN web, which is I think 10 dot, I don't remember, 10.1, whatever that CIDR range was. VM web was 10.0.1. Okay, so we can either give 10.0.1.0/24. Either this can be done, or you can also give the security group saying that SG web, that means allow only if the traffic is originating from a virtual machine that is associated to a security group SGWeb. So this will ensure that only your web servers can send traffic to your database servers, and your database servers can only receive traffic from your web servers. And we click save. Again repeating, for response, you don't need to configure an outbound rule for a security group. because security groups are stateful. So this we have done the configuration of security groups. Now we'll go ahead and do configurations of network ACL. Now to do that, we will go to VPC console. Alright. So yesterday we created two subnets, SNDB and SNWeb. Now if we go to SNWeb, down over here we have something called as network ACL. If I click on it, you will realize that SNWeb is associated with a default network ACL. So basically whenever you create a new VPC, a default network ACL is created, and whenever you create subnets inside that VPC, those subnets get automatically associated to this default network ACL. So yesterday we created two subnets, and again both the subnets are associated to the same default network ACL. And this is actually a very bad practice, because if you see default network ACL, the rules that it has, those allow all the incoming traffic. Do you see here the inbound rule? The inbound rule over here allows all the incoming traffic, and the outbound rule also allows all outgoing traffic. So a very bad security practice. So rather than that, what we'll do, we'll create our own network ACLs, one for our SNWeb, other for our SNDB, and then attach rules to it. So to create network ACL, left hand side in the navigation pane we have network ACL. Just click on it, and I'll click over here, create network ACL. I'll give it a name, NACL web, network ACL associated to I'll say SN web. And in the VPC, its scope is, I'll ask it to create in VPC HR. Let's say create. So I've intentionally given the name SN web such that we know that this network ACL, I'm planning to associate it to my subnet web servers. All right. Likewise, we'll go ahead and okay. So we'll do one thing at a time. We have created this SN web. Network ACL web. Now over here, once you created, first thing we'll do is we'll associate it to our subnet. So for that, go to subnet associations, click over here, edit subnet associations, and select your SN web and say edit. This is how you associate a network ACL to a subnet. Right? Earlier the subnet was associated with the default network ACL. Now we have associated to the new network ACL that we created. Okay. Now keep in mind that here we are talking about NACL web. So to allow a SQL request, what do we need to do? We need to first configure an outbound rule. By default, any new network ACL will have one outbound rule which will deny all traffic, as well as one inbound rule which will deny all traffic. So fine, we'll add rules to it. So we'll click over here, edit outbound rule, and we'll say add rule. Now network ACLs, all the rules are executed in a sequence in ascending order. So you need to give rule a number. We'll say 100. Basically, we don't keep it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because if you have to put a new rule between 1 and 2, it becomes difficult, right? So rather, if you put 100, 110, 120, and if you want to put a new rule in between, you can always create a new rule with the rule number as 105. All right, so I give rule number as 100. What is the type? I'll say outbound allow outgoing request to MS SQL. Again, what this will do, it will allow TCP traffic directed to port 1433. Again, what would be the destination over here? We can be more specific. We'll say only to our web servers. We know what will be the IP address range of our web servers: 1.0.2.0/24. And I say save. So with this, our outgoing request will flow out from the network ACL web. Now, once the request reaches your database server, you will get a response back. The database response will again come to your SN web. Now, this time, since network ACLs are stateless, you will have to explicitly configure an inbound rule over here to allow the response to pass through. Recall, in security group, you don't need to do that because security groups were stateful, but network ACL is stateless. You need to explicitly configure rules to allow inbound, to allow the response. So I click edit rules and I say add rule, maybe add a rule 100. Now the question is, what type over here? When a response comes in, do we know on which port the response will come in, the SQL response will come in? We don't know the exact port. So actually what happens is, when a response comes in, that response can be sent on any high value port. That means initially when your web server will send a request to your database server on port 1433, in that request the web server will also say that when you give me a response back, give me on a particular port. Give me on a port maybe 1025 or 35,000, whatever. There are high value ports starting from 1024 to 65,365. These ports are called as ephemeral ports, and basically these ports are used to receive responses. So we don't know on which one particular port a response will come, because that port is not fixed. So that's where in this inbound rule you need to open all the ports in that range. And how to do that? 1024-65535. You are just opening all the ports with which you are saying allow any TCP traffic that is being sent to this port. So basically whatever traffic is coming would be responses. Now you can specify the source over here as well. So you can put the CIDR of your database servers so that only the database responses will come and pass through your SN web. But remember, to your SN web, maybe you have web servers who would connect to some external web servers also, and maybe they will get a response back from those external web servers. So if you limit that source to only your database servers, those responses from some external services, some external web servers will not be allowed. So rather than specifying only your IP address range of your web servers, you keep it open as 0.0 so that you allow all the responses coming from database servers, web servers, and so on. Once we have done it, we click save. Once we have configured network ACL for SN web, very similar, we'll configure the same for our SNDB. Is it associated already? Yes, it is associated. Now let's go ahead and create SNDB. I call it network ACL SNDB in my VPC HR, and I click create. Once I have created network ACL SNDB, the first thing that I'll do is I'll associate it to my subnet SNDB. So I click edit over here and I say associate it to my subnet for my databases. And I click, that should be save actually. Now once I have done it, we'll now go ahead and configure the rules. So first we'll configure inbound rule. This will be receiving SQL SQL requests. So we click over here, inbound rule. We say add a rule number as 100. This time I'll say incoming traffic would be a request for Microsoft SQL Server. So that means allow open port 1433, and from which source you should keep your database servers as secured as possible. So you should put a CIDR range of your web servers. So 10.0.1.0, the CIDR range of our SN web /24, so that no one else other than those within your SN web can send a request to your database server. You allow it and you say save. So now your incoming request will come in. What about the response? For response, you'll have to explicitly configure an outbound rule, because network ACLs are, by this time you should be well aware, network ACLs are stateless. All right, so I click edit outbound rules. I click add rule. I give a rule number as 100. Again, we don't know the port range. The response will be going on which port. So we'll say 1024 and 65535. And destination, this time you'll say you can put a CIDR block over here saying that my database servers should only give responses to my web servers. So here you can actually put the CIDR of your web server destination 1.0.1 and over here /24, and we say save, and that's it. And this is how you actually configure and harden your web servers and database servers by configuring inbound and outbound rules to your security groups and to your network ACLs. Now we have learned how to configure our security groups and network ACLs to actually allow SQL traffic to flow from our virtual machine, from our web to our database. Keep in mind that router is implicit. You don't have to explicitly configure routers. Yes, some configuration is required. That we'll do it in the next video. Now, once we have done this, how do we test it, right? Because I'm here outside AWS. Now, to test if my web server is working or not, I need to send an HTTP request to the web server from the internet, or maybe remote login to my web server from the internet. That's what we will do in our next video. In part 4, we will understand how to give internet connection to our subnets, so that request from internet can be sent to our web servers and data can be retrieved from our web servers. Thank you for watching. Do let me know how did this video go. Stay tuned. Hopefully I should be releasing the part 4 tomorrow. Bye bye guys, stay safe.